The Story of Civilization, Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage, Part 1, by Will Durant, continued, Cassette 6, Side 1. Since the heliacal rising of Sirius occurred 1 day later every 4 years than the Egyptian calendar demanded, the error amounted to 365 days in 1460 years. On the completion of this Sothic cycle, as the Egyptians called it, the paper calendar and the celestial calendar again agreed. Since we know from the Latin author Censorius that the heliacal rising of Sirius coincided in 139 A.D. with the beginning of the Egyptian calendar year, we may presume that a similar coincidence occurred every 1460 years previously, that is, in 1321 B.C., 2781 B.C., 4241 B.C., etc. And since the Egyptian calendar was apparently established in a year when the heliacal rising of Sirius took place on the first day of the first month, we conclude that that calendar came into operation in a year that opened a Sothic cycle. The earliest mention of the Egyptian calendar is in the religious texts inscribed in the pyramids of the 4th dynasty. Since this dynasty is unquestionably earlier than 1321 B.C., the calendar must have been established in 2781 B.C., or 4241 B.C., or still earlier. The older date, once acclaimed as the first definite date in history, has been disputed by Professor Scharf, and it is possible that we shall have to accept 2781 B.C. as the approximate birth year of the Egyptian calendar. This would require a foreshortening by 300 or 400 years of the dates assigned above for the early dynasties and the Great Pyramids. As the matter is very much in dispute, the chronology of the Cambridge Ancient History has been adopted in these pages. Despite the opportunities offered by embalming, the Egyptians made relatively poor progress in the study of the human body. They thought that the blood vessels carried air, water, and excretory fluids, and they believed the heart and bowels to be the seat of the mind. Perhaps if we knew what they meant by these terms, we should find them not so divergent from our own ephemeral certainties. They described with general accuracy the larger bones and viscera, and recognized the function of the heart as the driving power of the organism and the center of the circulatory system. Its vessels, says the Ebers Papyrus, lead to all the members, whether the doctor lays his finger on the forehead, on the back of the head, on the hands, or on the feet. Everywhere he meets with the heart. From this to Leonardo and Harvey was but a step, which took 3,000 years. The glory of Egyptian science was medicine. Like almost everything else in the cultural life of Egypt, it began with the priests and dripped with evidences of its magical origins. Among the people, amulets were more popular than pills as preventive or curative of disease. Disease was to them a possession by devils and was to be treated with incantations. A cold, for instance, could be exorcised by such magic words as, "Depart, cold, son of a cold, thou who breakest the bones, destroyest the skull, makest ill the 7 openings of the head. Go out on the floor, stink, stink, stink." A cure probably as effective as contemporary remedies for this ancient disease. From such depths we rise in Egypt to great physicians, surgeons, and specialists, who acknowledged an ethical code that passed down into the famous Hippocratic Oath. Some of them specialized in obstetrics or gynecology, some treated only gastric disorders, some were oculists so internationally famous that Cyrus sent for one of them to come to Persia. The general practitioner was left to gather the crumbs and heal the poor, in addition to which he was expected to provide cosmetics, hair dyes, skin culture, limb beautification, and flea exterminators. Several papyri devoted to medicine have come down to us. The most valuable of them, named from the Edwin Smith who discovered it, is a roll 15 feet long, dating about 1600 B.C., and going back for its sources to much earlier works. Even in its extant form, it is the oldest scientific document known to history. It describes 48 cases in clinical surgery, from cranial fractures to injuries of the spine. Each case is treated in logical order, under the heads of provisional diagnosis, examination, semiology, diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, and glosses on the terms used. The author notes, with a clarity unrivaled till the 18th century of our era, that control of the lower limbs is localized in the brain, a word which here appears for the first time in literature. The Egyptians enjoyed a great variety of diseases, though they had to die of them without knowing their Greek names. The mummies and papyri tell of spinal tuberculosis, arteriosclerosis, gallstones, smallpox, infantile paralysis, anemia, rheumatic arthritis, epilepsy, gout, mastoiditis, appendicitis, and such marvelous affections as spondylitis deformans and achondroplasia. There are no signs of syphilis or cancer, but pyorrhea and dental caries, absent in the oldest mummies, become frequent in the later ones, indicating the progress of civilization. The atrophy and fusion of the bones of the small toe, often ascribed to the modern shoe, was common in ancient Egypt, where nearly all ages and ranks went barefoot. Against these diseases, the Egyptian doctors were armed with an abundant pharmacopoeia. The Ebers Papyrus lists 700 remedies for everything from snake bite to puerperal fever. The Kahun Papyrus, circa 1850 B.C., prescribes suppositories apparently used for contraception. The tomb of an 11th dynasty queen revealed a medicine chest containing vases, spoons, dried drugs, and roots. Prescriptions hovered between medicine and magic, and relied for their effectiveness in great part on the repulsiveness of the concoction. Lizard's blood, swine's ears and teeth, putrid meat and fat, a tortoise's brains, an old book boiled in oil, the milk of a lying-in woman, the water of a chaste woman, the excreta of men, donkeys, dogs, lions, cats, and lice, all these are found in the prescriptions. Baldness was treated by rubbing the head with animal fat. Some of these cures passed from the Egyptians to the Greeks, from the Greeks to the Romans, and from the Romans to us. We still swallow trustfully the strange mixtures that were brewed 4,000 years ago on the banks of the Nile. The Egyptians tried to promote health by public sanitation. Excavations reveal arrangements for the collection of rainwater and the disposal of sewage by a system of copper pipes. By circumcision of males, even the earliest tombs give evidence of this practice, and by teaching the people the frequent use of the enema. Diodorus Siculus tells us, in order to prevent sicknesses, they look after the health of their body by means of drenches, fastings, and emetics, sometimes every day and sometimes at intervals of 3 or 4 days. For they say that the larger part of the food taken into the body is superfluous, and that it is from this superfluous part that diseases are engendered. So old is the modern saw that we live on 1/4 of what we eat and the doctors live on the rest. Pliny believed that this habit of taking enemas was learned by the Egyptians from observing the ibis, a bird that counteracts the constipation character of its food by using its long bill as a rectal syringe. Herodotus reports that the Egyptians purged themselves every month, 3 days successively, seeking to preserve health by emetics and enemas, for they suppose that all diseases to which men are subject proceed from the food they use. And this first historian of civilization ranks the Egyptians as, next to the Libyans, the healthiest people in the world. 9. Art. Architecture, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, Empire, and Saite sculpture. Bas-relief, painting, minor arts, music, the artists. The greatest element in this civilization was its art. Here, almost at the threshold of history, we find an art powerful and mature, superior to that of any modern nation, and equaled only by that of Greece. At first the luxury of isolation and peace, and then under Thutmose III and Ramesses II, the spoils of oppression and war, gave to Egypt the opportunity and the means for massive architecture, masculine statuary, and 100 minor arts that so early touched perfection. The whole theory of progress hesitates before Egyptian art. Architecture was the noblest of the ancient arts because it combined in imposing form, mass and duration, beauty and use. It began humbly in the adornment of tombs and the external decoration of homes. Dwellings were mostly of mud, and here and there some pretty woodwork, a Japanese lattice, a well-carved portal, and a roof strengthened with the tough and pliable trunks of the palm. Around the house normally was a wall enclosing a court. From the court steps led to the roof. From this the tenants passed down into the rooms. The well-to-do had private gardens, carefully landscaped. The cities provided public gardens for the poor, and hardly a home but had its ornament of flowers. Inside the house the walls were hung with colored mattings, and the floors, if the master could afford it, were covered with rugs. People sat on these rugs rather than on chairs. The Egyptians of the Old Kingdom squatted for their meals at tables 6 inches high in the fashion of the Japanese, and ate with their fingers, like Shakespeare. Under the Empire, when slaves were cheap, the upper classes sat on high cushioned chairs and had their servants hand them course after course. Stone for building was too costly for homes. It was a luxury reserved for priests and kings. Even the nobles, ambitious though they were, left the greatest wealth and the best building materials to the temples. In consequence, the palaces that overlooked almost every mile of the river in the days of Amenhotep III crumbled into oblivion, while the abodes of the gods and the tombs of the dead remained. By the 12th dynasty, the pyramid had ceased to be the fashionable form of sepulture. Khnum-Hotep, circa 2180 B.C., chose at Beni Hassan the quieter form of a colonnade built into the mountainside, and this theme, once established, played 1,000 variations among the hills on the western slope of the Nile. From the time of the pyramids to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, that is, for some 3,000 years, there rose out of the sands of Egypt such a succession of architectural achievements as no civilization has ever surpassed. At Karnak and Luxor, a riot of columns raised by Thutmose I and III, Amenhotep III, Seti I, Ramesses II, and other monarchs from the 12th to the 22nd dynasty. At Medinet Habu, circa 1300 B.C., a vast but less distinguished edifice on whose columns an Arab village rested for centuries. At Abydos, the temple of Seti I, dark and somber in its massive ruins. At Elephantine, the little temple of Khnum, circa 1400 B.C., positively Greek in its precision and elegance. At Deir el-Bahri, the stately colonnades of Queen Hatshepsut. Near it, the Ramesseum, another forest of colossal columns and statues reared by the architects and slaves of Ramesses II. At Philae, the lovely temple of Isis, circa 240 B.C., desolate and abandoned, now that the damming of the Nile at Aswan has submerged the bases of its perfect columns. These are sample fragments of the many monuments that still adorn the valley of the Nile, and attest even in their ruins the strength and courage of the race that reared them. Here perhaps is an excess of pillars, a crowding of columns against the tyranny of the sun, a Far Eastern aversion to symmetry, a lack of unity, a barbaric modern adoration of size. But here, too, are grandeur, sublimity, majesty, and power. Here are the arch and the vault, used sparingly because not needed, but ready to pass on their principles to Greece and Rome and modern Europe. Here are decorative designs never surpassed. Here are papyriform columns, lotiform columns, proto-Doric columns, caryatid columns, Hathor capitals, palm capitals, clerestories, and magnificent architraves full of the strength and stability that are the very soul of architecture's powerful appeal. The Egyptians were the greatest builders in history. Some would add that they were also the greatest sculptors. Here at the outset is the Sphinx, conveying by its symbolism the leonine quality of some masterful pharaoh, perhaps Khafre Khephren. It has not only size, as some have thought, but character. The cannon shot of the Mamelukes have broken the nose and shorn the beard, but nevertheless those gigantic features portray with impressive skill the force and dignity, the calm and skeptical maturity of a natural king. Across those motionless features a subtle smile has hovered for 5,000 years, as if already the unknown artist or monarch had understood all that men would ever understand about men. It is a Mona Lisa in stone. There is nothing finer in the history of sculpture than the diorite statue of Khafre in the Cairo Museum. As ancient to Praxiteles as Praxiteles to us, it nevertheless comes down across 50 centuries almost unhurt by time's rough usages. Cut in the most intractable of stones, it passes on to us completely the strength and authority, the willfulness and courage, the sensitivity and intelligence of the artist or the king. Near it, and even older, Pharaoh Zoser sits pouting in limestone. Farther on, the guide with lighted match reveals the transparency of an alabaster Menkauri. Quite as perfect in artistry as these portraits of royalty are the figures of the Sheikh el-Beled and the scribe. The scribe has come down to us in many forms, all of uncertain antiquity. The most illustrious is the squatting scribe of the Louvre. The sheikh is no sheikh, but only an overseer of labor, armed with the staff of authority and stepping forward as if in supervision or command. His name apparently was Ka'apiru, but the Arab workmen who rescued him from his tomb at Saqqara were struck with his resemblance to the Sheikh el-Beled, that is, the mayor of the village, under whom they lived, and this title which their good humor gave him is now inseparable from his fame. He is carved only in mortal wood, but time has not seriously reduced his portly figure or his chubby legs. His waistline has all the amplitude of the comfortable bourgeois in every civilization. His rotund face beams with the content of a man who knows his place and glories in it. The bald head and carelessly loosened robe display the realism of an art already old enough to rebel against idealization, but here too is a fine simplicity, a complete humanity, expressed without bitterness, and with the ease and grace of a practiced and confident hand. If, says Maspero, some exhibition of the world's masterpieces were to be inaugurated, I should choose this work to uphold the honor of Egyptian art. Or would that honor rest more securely on the head of Khafre? These are the chefs-d'oeuvre of Old Kingdom statuary, but lesser masterpieces abound. The seated portraits of Rahotep and his wife Nofret, the powerful figure of Ranofer the priest, the copper statues of King Phaops and his son, a falcon head in gold, the humorous figures of the beer brewer and the dwarf Knemhotep, all but one in the Cairo Museum, all without exception instinct with character. It is true that the earlier pieces are coarse and crude, that by a strange convention running throughout Egyptian art, figures are shown with the body and eyes facing forward, but the hands and feet in profile, that not much attention was given to the body, which was left in most cases stereotyped and unreal, all female bodies young, all royal bodies strong, and that individualization, though masterly, was generally reserved for the head. There are important exceptions to this. For example, the Sheikh el-Beled and the scribe. Obviously the convention was not due to incapacity or ignorance. But with all the stiffness and sameness that priestly conventions and control forced upon statuary, paintings, and reliefs, these works were fully redeemed by the power and depth of the conception, the vigor and precision of the execution, the character, line, and finish of the product. Never was sculpture more alive. The sheikh exudes authority. The woman grinding grain gives every sense and muscle to her work. The scribe is on the very verge of writing. And the 1,000 little puppets placed in the tombs to carry on essential industries for the dead were molded with a like vivacity, so that we can almost believe, with the pious Egyptian, that the deceased could not be unhappy while these ministrants were there. Not for many centuries did Egyptian sculpture equal again the achievements of the early dynasties. Because most of the statuary was made for the temples or the tombs, the priests determined to a great degree what forms the artists should follow, and the natural conservatism of religion crept into art, slowly stifling sculpture into a conventional, stylistic degeneration. Under the powerful monarchs of the 12th dynasty, the secular spirit reasserted itself, and art recaptured something of its old vigor and more than its old skill. A head of Amenemhet III in black diorite suggests at once the recovery of character and the recovery of art. Here is the quiet hardness of an able king, carved with the competence of a master. A colossal statue of Senesret III is crowned with a head and face equal in conception and execution to any portrait in the history of sculpture. And the ruined torso of Senesret I in the Cairo Museum ranks with the torso of Hercules in the Louvre. Animal figures abound in the Egyptian sculpture of every age and are always full of humor and life. Here is a mouse chewing a nut, an ape devotedly strumming a harp, a porcupine with every spine on the qui-vive. Then came the shepherd kings, and for 300 years Egyptian art almost ceased to be. In the age of Hatshepsut, the Thutmoses, the Amenhoteps, and the Ramesses, art underwent a second resurrection along the Nile. Wealth poured in from subject Syria, passed into the temples and the courts, and trickled through them to nourish every art. Colossi of Thutmose III and Ramesses II began to challenge the sky. Statuary crowded every corner of the temples. Masterpieces were flung forth with unprecedented abundance by a race exhilarated with what they thought was world supremacy. The fine granite bust of the Great Queen in the Metropolitan Museum of Art at New York, the basalt statue of Thutmose III in the Cairo Museum, the lion sphinx of Amenhotep III in the British Museum, the limestone-seated Iknaton in the Louvre, the granite statue of Ramesses II in Turin, the perfect crouching figure of the same incredible monarch making an offering to the gods, the meditative cow of Der el-Bahri, which Maspero considered equal if not superior to the best achievements of Greece and Rome in this genre, the two lions of Amenhotep III, which Ruskin ranked as the best animal statuary surviving from antiquity, The colossi cut into the rocks at Abu Simbel by the sculptors of Ramesses II, the amazing remains found among the ruins of the artist Thutmose's studio at Tel el Amarna, a plaster model of Akhenaton's head, full of the mysticism and poetry of that tragic king, the lovely limestone bust of Akhenaton's queen, Nofreteti, and the even finer sandstone head of the same fair lady. These scattered examples may illustrate the sculptural accomplishments of this abounding empire age. Amid all these lofty masterpieces, humor continues to find place. Egyptian sculptors frolic with jolly caricatures of men and animals, and even the kings and queens in Akhenaton's iconoclastic age are made to smile and play. After Ramesses II, this magnificence passed rapidly away. For many centuries after him, art contented itself with repeating traditional works and forms. Under the Saite kings, it sought to rejuvenate itself by returning to the simplicity and sincerity of the old kingdom masters. Sculptors attacked bravely the hardest stones, basalt, breccia, serpentine, diorite, and carved them into such realistic portraits as that of Montumahite, and the green basalt head of a bald unknown, now looking out blackly upon the walls of the State Museum at Berlin. In bronze they cast the lovely figure of the Lady Tekoshet. Again, they delighted in catching the actual features and movements of men and beasts. They molded laughable figures of quaint animals, slaves, and gods, and they formed in bronze a cat and a goat's head, which are among the trophies of Berlin. Then the Persians came down like a wolf on the fold, conquered Egypt, desecrated its temples, broke its spirit, and put an end to its art. These, architecture and sculpture, are the major Egyptian arts, but if abundance counted, bas-relief would have to be added to them. No other people so tirelessly carved its history or legends upon its walls. At first we are shocked by the dull similarity of these glyptic narratives, the crowded confusion, the absence of proportion and perspective, or the ungainly attempt to achieve this by representing the far above the near. We are surprised to see how tall the pharaoh is, and how small are his enemies, and, as in the sculpture, we find it hard to adjust our pictorial habits to eyes and breasts that face us boldly, while noses, chins, and feet turn coldly away. But then we find ourselves caught by the perfect line and grace of the falcon and serpent carved on King Wenepes's tomb, by the limestone reliefs of King Zoser on the step pyramid at Saqqara, by the wood relief of Prince Hesire from his grave in the same locality, and by the wounded Libyan on a 5th dynasty tomb at Abusir, a patient study of muscles taut in pain. At last we bear with equanimity the long reliefs that tell how Thutmose III and Ramesses II carried all before them. We recognize the perfection of flowing line in the reliefs carved for Seti I at Abydos and Karnak. And we follow with interest the picturesque engravings wherein the sculptors of Hatshepsut tell on the walls of Der el-Bahri the story of the expedition sent by her to the mysterious land of Punt, Somaliland. We see the long ships with full-spread sail and serried oars heading south amid waters alive with octopi, crustacea, and other toilers of the sea. We watch the fleet arriving on the shores of Punt, welcomed by a startled but fascinated people and king. We see the sailors carrying on board 1,000 loads of native delicacies. We read the jest of the Punt workmen. Be careful of your feet, you over there, look out. Then we accompany the heavy-laden vessels as they return northward, filled, the inscription tells us, with the marvels of the land of Punt, all the odoriferous trees of the lands of the gods, incense, ebony, ivory, gold, woods of divers kinds, cosmetics for the eyes, monkeys, dogs, panther skins. Never have like things been brought back for any king from the beginning of the world. The ships come through the great canal between the Red Sea and the Nile. We see the expedition landing at the docks of Thebes, depositing its varied cargo at the very feet of the queen. And lastly we are shown, as if after the lapse of time, all these imported goods beautifying Egypt. On every side ornaments of gold and ebony, boxes of perfumes and unguents, elephants' tusks and animals' hides, while the trees brought back from Punt are flourishing so well on the soil of Thebes that under their branches oxen enjoy the shade. It is one of the supreme reliefs in the history of art. Bas-relief is a liaison between sculpture and painting. In Egypt, except during the reign of the Ptolemies and under the influence of Greece, painting never rose to the status of an independent art. It remained an accessory to architecture, sculpture, and relief. The painter filled in the outlines carved by the cutting tool. But though subordinate, it was ubiquitous. Most statues were painted, all surfaces were colored. It is an art perilously subject to time and lacking the persistence of statuary and building. Very little remains to us of Old Kingdom painting beyond a remarkable picture of 6 geese from a tomb at Medum. But from this alone we are justified in believing that already in the early dynasties this art too had come near to perfection. In the Middle Kingdom we find distemper painting of a delightful decorative effect in the tombs of Ameni and Khnumhotep at Beni Hassan, and such excellent examples of the art as the gazelles and the peasants, and the cat watching the prey. Here again the artist has caught the main point, that his creations must move and live. Under the Empire the tombs become a riot of painting. The Egyptian artist had now developed every color in the rainbow, and was anxious to display his skill. On the walls and ceilings of homes, temples, palaces, and graves he tried to portray refreshingly the life of the sunny fields. Birds in flight through the air, fishes swimming in the sea, beasts of the jungle in their native haunts. Floors were painted to look like transparent pools, and ceilings sought to rival the jewelry of the sky. Around these pictures were borders of geometric or floral design, ranging from a quiet simplicity to the most fascinating complexity. The dancing girl, so full of originality and esprit, the bird hunt in a boat, the slim naked beauty in ochre mingling with other musicians in the tomb of Nakht at Thebes. These are stray samples of the painted population of the graves. Here, as in the bas-reliefs, the line is good and the composition poor. The participants in an action, whom we should portray as intermingled, are represented separately in succession. Superposition is again preferred to perspective. The stiff formalism and conventions of Egyptian sculpture are the order of the day and do not reveal that enlivening humor and realism which distinguish the later statuary. But through these pictures runs a freshness of conception, a flow of line and execution, a fidelity to the life and movement of natural things, and a joyous exuberance of color and ornament which make them a delight to the eye and the spirit. With all its shortcomings, Egyptian painting would never be surpassed by any Oriental civilization until the middle dynasties of China. The minor arts were the major art of Egypt. The same skill and energy that had built Karnak and the pyramids, and had crowded the temples with a populace of stone, devoted itself also to the internal beautification of the home, the adornment of the body, and the development of all the graces of life. Weavers made rugs, tapestries, and cushions rich in color and incredibly fine in texture. The designs which they created passed down into Syria and are used there to this day. The relics of Tutankhamun's tomb have revealed the astonishing luxury of Egyptian furniture, the exquisite finish of every piece and part, chairs covered gaudily with silver and gold, beds of sumptuous workmanship and design, jewel boxes and perfume baskets of minute artistry, and vases that only China would excel. Tables bore costly vessels of silver, gold, and bronze, crystal goblets, and sparkling bowls of diorite so finely ground that the light shone through their stone walls. The alabaster vessels of Tutankhamun and the perfect lotus cups and drinking bowls unearthed amid the ruins of Amenhotep III's villa at Thebes indicate to what a high level the ceramic art was raised. Finally, the jewelers of the Middle Kingdom and the Empire brought forth a profusion of precious ornaments seldom surpassed in design and workmanship. Necklaces, crowns, rings, bracelets, mirrors, pectorals, chains, medallions, gold and silver, carnelian and felspar, lapis lazuli and amethyst. Everything is here. The rich Egyptians took the same pleasure as the Japanese in the beauty of the little things that surrounded them. Every square of ivory on their jewel boxes had to be carved in relief and refined in precise detail. They dressed simply, but they lived completely. And when their day's work was done, they refreshed themselves with music softly played on lutes, harps, sistrums, flutes, and lyres. The lute was made by stretching a few strings along a narrow sounding board. The sistrum was a group of small discs shaken on wires. Temples and palaces had orchestras and choirs, and on the pharaoh's staff was a superintendent of singing, who organized players and musicians for the entertainment of the king. There is no trace of a musical notation in Egypt, but this may be merely a lacuna in the remains. Snefrenofer and Raymery Ptah were the Carusos and Dereshkis of their day, and across the centuries we hear their boast that they fulfill every wish of the king by their beautiful singing. It is exceptional that their names survive, for in most cases the artists whose labors preserved the features or memory of princes, priests, and kings had no means of transmitting their own names to posterity. We hear of Imhotep, the almost mythical architect of Zoser's reign, of Inanni, who designed great buildings like Deir el-Bahri for Thutmose I, of Pwimri and Hapuseneb and Senmut, who carried on the architectural enterprises of Queen Hatshepsut, of the artist Thutmose, in whose studio so many masterpieces have been found, and of Beck, the proud sculptor who tells us in Gautier's strain that he has saved Iknaton from oblivion. Amenhotep III had as his chief architect another Amenhotep, son of Hapu. The pharaoh placed almost limitless wealth at the disposal of his talents, and this favored artist became so famous that later Egypt worshipped him as a god. For the most part, however, the artist worked in obscurity and poverty, and was ranked no higher than other artisans or handicraftsmen by the priests and potentates who engaged him. Egyptian religion cooperated with Egyptian wealth to inspire and foster art, and cooperated with Egypt's loss of empire and affluence to ruin it. Religion offered motives, ideas, and the inspiration, but it imposed conventions and restraints which bound art so completely to the church that when sincere religion died among the artists, the arts that had lived on it died too. This is the tragedy of almost every civilization, that its soul is in its faith, and seldom survives philosophy. 10. Philosophy. The instructions of Ptahhotep, the admonitions of Ipuwer, the dialogue of a misanthrope, the Egyptian Ecclesiastes. Historians of philosophy have been wont to begin their story with the Greeks, the Hindus, who believe that they invented philosophy, and the Chinese, who believe that they perfected it, smile at our provincialism. It may be that we are all mistaken, for among the most ancient fragments left to us by the Egyptians are writings that belong, however loosely and untechnically, under the rubric of moral philosophy. The wisdom of the Egyptians was a proverb with the Greeks, who felt themselves children beside this ancient race. The oldest work of philosophy known to us is the Instructions of Ptahhotep, which apparently goes back to 2880 B.C., 2,300 years before Confucius, Socrates, and Buddha. Ptahhotep was governor of Memphis and prime minister to the king under the 5th dynasty. Retiring from office, he decided to leave to his son a manual of everlasting wisdom. It was transcribed as an antique classic by some scholars prior to the 18th dynasty. The vizier begins, O prince, my lord, the end of life is at hand. Old age descendeth upon me, feebleness cometh, and childishness is renewed. He that is old lieth down in misery every day. The eyes are small, the ears are deaf. Energy is diminished, the heart hath no rest. Command thy servant, therefore, to make over my princely authority to my son. Let me speak unto him the words of them that hearken to the counsel of the men of old time, those that once heard the gods. I pray thee, let this thing be done. His gracious majesty grants the permission, advising him, however, to discourse without causing weariness, advice not yet superfluous for philosophers. Whereupon Ptahhotep instructs his son, Be not proud because thou art learned, but discourse with the ignorant man as with the sage. For no limit can be set to skill, neither is there any craftsman that possesseth full advantages. Fair speech is more rare than the emerald that is found by slave maidens among the pebbles. Live, therefore, in the house of kindliness, and men shall come and give gifts of themselves. Beware of making enmity by thy words. Overstep not the truth, neither repeat that which any man, be he prince or peasant, saith in opening the heart. It is abhorrent to the soul. If thou wouldst be a wise man, beget a son for the pleasing of the god. If he make straight his course after thine example, if he arrange thine affairs in due order, do all unto him that is good. If he be heedless, and trespass thy rules of conduct, and is violent, if every speech that cometh from his mouth is a vile word, then beat thou him, that his talk may be fitting. Precious to a man is the virtue of his son, and good character is a thing remembered. Wheresoever thou goest, beware of consorting with women. If thou wouldst be wise, provide for thine house, and love thy wife that is in thine arms. Silence is more profitable to thee than abundance of speech. Consider how thou mayest be opposed by an expert that speaketh in counsel. It is a foolish thing to speak on every kind of work. If thou be powerful, make thyself to be honored for knowledge and for gentleness. Beware of interruption, and of answering words with heat, Put it from thee. Control thyself. And Ptahhotep concludes with Horatian pride. Nor shall any word that hath here been set down cease out of this land forever, but shall be made a pattern whereby princes shall speak well. My words shall instruct a man how he shall speak. Yea, he shall become as one skillful in obeying, excellent in speaking. Good fortune shall befall him. He shall be gracious until the end of his life. He shall be contented always. This note of good cheer does not persist in Egyptian thought. Age comes upon it quickly and sours it. Another sage, Ipuwer, bemoans the disorder, violence, famine, and decay that attended the passing of the old kingdom. He tells of skeptics who would make offerings if they knew where the god is. He comments upon increasing suicide and adds, like another Schopenhauer, "Would that there might be an end of men, that there might be no conception, no birth, if the land would but cease from noise and strife be no more." It is clear that Ipuwer was tired and old. In the end he dreams of a philosopher king who will redeem men from chaos and injustice. He brings cooling to the flame of the social conflagration. It is said he is the shepherd of all men. There is no evil in his heart. When his herds are few, he passes the day to gather them together, their hearts being fevered. Would that he had discerned their character in the first generation. Then would he have smitten evil. He would have stretched forth his arm against it. He would have smitten the seed thereof and their inheritance. Where is he today? Doth he sleep perchance? Behold, his might is not seen. This already is the voice of the prophets. The lines are cast into strophic form like the prophetic writings of the Jews, and Breasted properly acclaims these admonitions as the earliest emergence of a social idealism which among the Hebrews we call Messianism. Another scroll from the Middle Kingdom denounces the corruption of the age in words that almost every generation hears. To whom do I speak today? Brothers are evil, friends of today are not of love. To whom do I speak today? Hearts are thievish. Every man seizes his neighbor's goods. To whom do I speak today? The gentle man perishes, the bold-faced goes everywhere. To whom do I speak today? When a man should arouse wrath by his evil conduct, he stirs all men to mirth, although his iniquity is wicked. And then this Egyptian Swinburne pours out a lovely eulogy of death. Death is before me today like the recovery of a sick man, like going forth into a garden after sickness. Death is before me today like the odor of myrrh, like sitting under the sail on a windy day. Death is before me today like the odor of lotus flowers, like sitting on the shore of drunkenness. Death is before me today like the course of a freshet, like the return of a man from the war galley to his house. Death is before me today as a man longs to see his home when he had spent years of captivity. Saddest of all is a poem engraved upon a slab now in the Leiden Museum, dating back to 2200 B.C. Carpe diem, it sings, snatch the day. I have heard the words of Imhotep and Hardedef, words greatly celebrated as their utterances. Behold the places thereof. Their walls are dismantled, their places are no more, as if they had never been. None cometh from thence, that he may tell us how they fare, that he may content our hearts until we too depart to the place whither they have gone. Encourage thy heart to forget it. Make it pleasant for thee to follow thy desire while thou livest. Put myrrh upon thy head, and garments upon thee of fine linen, imbued with marvelous luxuries, the genuine things of the gods. Increase yet more thy delights, and let not thy heart languish. Follow thy desire and thy good. Fashion thy affairs on earth after the mandates of thine own heart, till that day of lamentation come to thee, when the silent-hearted, dead, hears not their lamentation, nor he that is in the tomb attends the mourning. Celebrate the glad day. Be not weary therein. Lo, no man taketh his goods with him. Yea, none returneth again that is gone thither. This pessimism and skepticism were the result, it may be, of the broken spirit of a nation humiliated and subjected by the Hyksos invaders. They bear the same relation to Egypt that Stoicism and Epicureanism bear to a defeated and enslaved Greece. In part, such literature represents one of those interludes, like our own moral interregnum, in which thought has for a time overcome belief, and men no longer know how or why they should live. Such periods do not endure. Hope soon wins the victory over thought. The intellect is put down to its customary menial place, and religion is born again, giving to men the imaginative stimulus apparently indispensable to life and work. We need not suppose that such poems expressed the views of any large number of Egyptians. Behind and around the small but vital minority that pondered the problems of life and death in secular and naturalistic terms were millions of simple men and women who remained faithful to the gods and never doubted that right would triumph, that every earthly pain and grief would be atoned for bountifully in a haven of happiness and peace. 11. Religion. Sky gods, the sun god, plant gods, animal gods, sex gods, human gods, Osiris, Isis and Horus, minor deities, the priests, immortality, the Book of the Dead, the negative confession, magic, corruption. For beneath and above everything in Egypt was religion. We find it there in every stage and form, from totemism to theology. We see its influence in literature, in government, in art, in everything except morality. And it is not only varied, it is tropically abundant. Only in Rome and India shall we find so plentiful a pantheon. We cannot understand the Egyptian or man until we study his gods. In the beginning, said the Egyptian, was the sky, and to the end this and the Nile remained his chief divinities. All these marvelous heavenly bodies were not mere bodies. They were the external forms of mighty spirits, gods whose wills, not always concordant, ordained their complex and varied movements. The sky itself was a vault, across whose vastness a great cow stood, who was the goddess Hathor. The earth lay beneath her feet, and her belly was clad in the beauty of 10,000 stars. Or, for the gods and myths differed from nome to nome, the sky was the god Sibu, lying tenderly upon the earth, which was the goddess Nuit. From their gigantic copulation all things had been born. Constellations and stars might be gods. For example, Sahu and Soptit, Orion and Sirius, were tremendous deities. Sahu ate gods 3 times a day regularly. Occasionally some such monster ate the moon, but only for a moment. Soon the prayers of men and the anger of the other gods forced the greedy sow to vomit it up again. In this manner the Egyptian populace explained an eclipse of the moon. The moon was a god, perhaps the oldest of all that were worshipped in Egypt. But in the official theology the greatest of the gods was the sun. Sometimes it was worshipped as the supreme deity Ra, or Re, the bright father who fertilized Mother Earth with rays of penetrating heat and light. Sometimes it was a divine calf, born anew at every dawn, sailing the sky slowly in a celestial boat, and descending into the west at evening like an old man tottering to his grave. Or the sun was the god Horus, taking the graceful form of a falcon, flying majestically across the heavens day after day, as if in supervision of his realm, and becoming one of the recurrent symbols of Egyptian religion and royalty. Always Ra, or the sun, was the creator. At his first rising, seeing the earth desert and bare, he had flooded it with his energizing rays, and all living things, vegetable, animal, and human, had sprung pell-mell from his eyes and been scattered over the world. The earliest men and women, being direct children of Ra, had been perfect and happy. By degrees their descendants had taken to evil ways and had forfeited this perfection and happiness, whereupon Ra, dissatisfied with his creatures, had destroyed a large part of the human race. Learned Egyptians questioned this popular belief and asserted on the contrary, like certain Sumerian scholars, that the first men had been like brutes, without articulate speech or any of the arts of life. All in all, it was an intelligent mythology, expressing piously man's gratitude to earth and sun. So exuberant was this piety that the Egyptians worshipped not merely the source, but almost every form of life. Many plants were sacred to them, the palm tree that shaded them amid the desert, the spring that gave them drink in the oasis, the grove where they could meet and rest, the sycamore flourishing miraculously in the sand. These were, with excellent reason, holy things, and to the end of his civilization the simple Egyptian brought them offerings of cucumbers, grapes, and figs. Even the lowly vegetable found its devotees, and Ten amused himself by showing how the onion that so displeased Bossuet had been a divinity on the banks of the Nile. More popular were the animal gods. They were so numerous that they filled the Egyptian pantheon like a chattering menagerie. This book is continued at this point on the other side of this cassette. Please reverse or turn the cassette over now.